Leader take note, renewing the practices of leader coachability. What happened to 93 leaders that you'll want to avoid? When a professional leadership coach meets a new client, what are the tip-offs that the leader will or will not improve? What do all trained actors learn early in their career that can help transform how you see feedback? This video will address these questions as we visit why coachability is critical to your ongoing success, what is leadership coachability, how to improve the current level of leadership coachability using a simple 4-part practices model. While serving as a talent management and chief learning officer for a Fortune 500 company, one of my many responsibilities was to enable the growth and success of our leadership population. The work would typically involve analyzing success profiles and patterns of our officers and director populations worldwide, and then applying these insights to increase the effectiveness of our current leaders and to invest in growing the next generation of leaders. But one day I started balancing the profile by looking at leaders that didn't do so well. In fact, another profile emerged from the 93 leaders who were identified as derailed, usually very talented, hardworking leaders who ended up in a role over their heads and were let go. While looking at the records of these leaders versus successful ones, one item jumped out from their last 360 report. Does this leader seek and respond to feedback? The comparison was very dramatic. The leaders that had derailed were ranked 30% lower and less likely to seek and respond to feedback versus those that were successful. And because of that, I believe they developed serious blind spots. So coachability is important to avoid the blind spots, but we have to admit, we all have blind spots, or as someone once said, the most common blind spot is believing others have them, but we don't. As a next step, I reached out to the consulting firm that conducted the Leadership 360, Zenger Folkman, and worked with them to analyze their extensive database of 50,000 leaders across virtually all industries, countries, and leadership levels. Building off the question of seeking and responding to feedback, we looked at coachability for all these leaders and compared it to their overall leadership effectiveness. No surprise that we found correlations between leadership coachability and overall effectiveness. In fact, highly coachable leaders were 4 times more likely to be rated as overall more effective leaders. And also across the 16 competencies, including creativity, innovation, and influence. So in addition to avoiding blind spots, highly coachable leaders are seen overall as highly effective leaders. Highly coachable leaders also had an impact on employee engagement. A study found that highly coachable leaders have 2.5 times greater employee engagement, and they were rated as much better coaches. So increased employee engagement is another benefit of being highly coachable. A final study looked at performance and promotability of leaders, and again we found strong correlations that highly coachable leaders' performance and promotability ratings were 20% higher. So in summary, avoiding blind spots, increased leader effectiveness, increased employee engagement, increased performance and potential. All good. So what's the problem with leader coachability? Well, it's this. One other study of 50,000 leaders looked at coachability by level. And as you guessed it, it goes down dramatically. Frontline leaders were seen as well over 70% effective, and by the time you got to be a senior leader, it had declined over 36%. So what's going on? Well, a number of things are happening. And again, these aren't just derailed leaders, these are all leaders overall. 3 that I'd ask you to consider. The first is the notion about, I've arrived. I've gotten the promotion, I've got the skill set, therefore I don't need any more feedback. Secondly, all the employees tell me are good things, so it's all positive. And finally, the issue of being lonely at the top, that we don't really have a benchmark to compare ourselves, and we don't have feedback loops because of that. But there is hope. A final look at the database showed that there were leaders, regardless of level, that maintain high levels of coachability and high levels of effectiveness. So whether it's a senior executive, a middle career leader, that there were certain things leaders did to maintain their coachability. And so the investigation from that point included surveying 50 executive coaches and asking, when you see highly coachable leaders, what are they doing? We also then looked at the academic literature related to things like emotional intelligence, self-efficacy, feedback seeking, learning agility, humility, mindfulness. We put an instrument together and have gone through a number of rounds to assess coachability. And then finally, we've had a number of workshops with professional coaches and other leadership development professionals looking at how to apply and how to fine-tune the material. And from that, we've got a simple framework. So here's coachability. There are clearly some things in the environment and also some attributes of the leader that impact coachability. On the environment front, things like working in an environment that's very supportive of growth and development and feedback, having positive role models, and then finally having resources and routines to develop and to receive feedback. Also, we found individual leader attributes matter, that leaders that were open to experience and curious, leaders that had an interesting balance of confidence, but also humility, that there's a sweet spot of coachability there. But ultimately, it's about the practices. So what I would recommend is, while we do have some environmental challenges, we might have some attributes that help or hurt us, ultimately it's about the practices that keep us highly coachable. So here's the model. Highly coachable leaders do 4 things consistently. First of all, highly coachable leaders are intentional and they value feedback and they look to others to seek ideas on how to improve. And they provide visible signals that they welcome feedback and ideas. Secondly, whether the incoming feedback is a result of asking for it or not, highly coachable leaders respond in a mature way, first to understand the message given, and then to look for insights. So after seeking it and responding to it, a leader will reflect. And highly coachable leaders take time to reflect on the feedback and input received, to understand its underlying meaning, and to integrate connections with other ideas, and finally, in judging the input, to decide whether it's valuable to act or not. Finally, if the decision is to act, highly coachable leaders initiate improvement based on the valued impact, and they sustain improvement over time. So, it's a simple model. What's critical here are the 4 practices. Now the question is how? That it's one thing to describe these 4 practices of a highly coachable leader, but here's a few tips. If you're interested in getting better at seeking feedback, one of the things leaders found very helpful is to put a worksheet together and brainstorm on what would help in terms of input from others. In one column, you could create a list of topics to receive input and feedback on. It may be regarding your role, your job, goals, things you value, and then to think about what sources, what people you would go to receive that input. And finally, then to think about how you'd approach that. When it comes to responding, I had an interesting finding there that I want to pass on to you, and this is the mindset of an actor. I was at a conference a number of years ago, and a senior executive from the Disney Corporation had just presented a short video clip. Afterwards, in taking questions and answers, someone had criticized the video, and what the leader said will always stick with me. In listening carefully, she then responded by saying, "Thanks for the note." I was very curious about that phrase, "thanks for the note," and dug into it. And what I found is, in theater and in other acting professions, actors are taught to take a note. It seems that after rehearsal, a director would then offer direct feedback or notes to the actors. And as I talked to one actor about that, early on you're trained to take notes because, as he put it, you only see your part of the performance and you really don't have a clear sense of how you're coming across. You rely on notes and the director to give you input to improve and to get it right. One actor passed along a very helpful document that talked about actors' etiquette and a notion of notes, and I find this fascinating and one to think about when responding to feedback. Here's what actors are told: that when the director gives you notes, pay attention and write them down. Respond to the note with a thank you. If you need clarity, ask for greater detail, but do not argue with the note. Actors are responsible for taking the note and incorporating them into the work. And then finally, everyone gets them, and you can strengthen your own work by listening carefully. So this notion about taking notes in the acting profession to get better, to get it right, I think also applies to leaders. that when we're receiving feedback, to think about them not as criticism, but as notes to help you with performance. So, to respond well, a couple tips: be aware of the triggers and your tendencies and practice a response when notes are coming your way. I encourage you to think about starting the conversation with, "Thank you, could you please tell me more?" When it comes to reflecting, most leaders are so rushed they don't spend time adequately thinking about the input, the notes, and what to do. And I encourage you to think about building more reflection into your routines. Perhaps 5 minutes a day, thinking about what your intent as a leader is that day. 15 minutes at the end of the week to think about how did you do on your intent, what sort of notes and input have you received that could help you get better. And perhaps a 30-minute focus where you deeply reflect on where you're improving and how to keep growing as a leader. Sometimes those reflections happen in a journal, and for some others, it's with a trusted colleague or a coach or truth teller. Finally, taking that insight to action, a couple ideas. There's a lot of popular input now on the notion about mini habits, thinking about big improvements, but starting very small. So I'd leave you with this. What area of coachability would you like to improve? And what are some simple mini habits or small things you can do to seek a little more input, to respond a little better when a note is coming your way, to reflect more about how you're doing as a leader and opportunities to improve, and then finally, some simple next steps. So in summary, one of the differences between successful leaders and those that derail is the notion about avoiding blind spots and being coachable. And in fact, there's more and more indicators that coachability is a critical factor to overall leadership effectiveness, but it naturally declines as one advances. So you've got to keep up the practices. And the practice to think about is to seek feedback, to respond well to notes when they come your way, to reflect a little more on it, and to take simple actions to improve. With that, best wishes to you. And if you need more information, please go to thecoachableleader.com.